Homeless teen returns a lost wallet, shocked when 300 bikers arrive to thank him. The wind was a blade, carving its way through the threadbare fabric of Leo's coat. It found every frayed seam, every worn thin patch, and poured the city's bitter cold directly onto his skin. He was 17, though the hollows in his cheeks and the ancient weariness in his eyes made him look years older. He sat huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed bookstore, a small, forgotten figure against the grimy brick. Snow, which had been a gentle dusting an hour ago, was now falling in thick, determined flakes, blanketing the world in a pristine white that felt like an accusation against his own filth. The world was being made clean, and he was being erased. Hunger was a dull, constant ache in his stomach, a beast that had long ago stopped roaring and settled into a patient, gnawing emptiness. This was his world. The biting wind, the gnawing hunger, the profound, crushing loneliness of being invisible in a city of millions. He watched the legs of people hurrying past, their faces buried in scarves, their minds on warm homes and hot meals. They were characters in a story he could no longer read. Then, through the swirl of snow, he saw a pair of heavy black boots stop before the pharmacy across the narrow street. They belonged to a large, broad-shouldered man whose back was covered by a leather vest, though the intricate patch on it was obscured by the snowfall. The man seemed agitated, patting his pockets with a frantic energy before rushing inside the brightly lit store. As he disappeared through the automatic doors, something dark and rectangular slipped from his back pocket and fell silently onto the fresh snow. A wallet. Leo's heart gave a painful thud against his ribs. He watched the wallet for a long moment, a black blemish on a perfect white canvas. No one else had seen. The street was a river of hurried footsteps, none of them pausing. The cold was getting worse, seeping into his bones, and the gnawing in his gut sharpened into a desperate pang. That small leather rectangle was a key, could unlock a door to a cheap motel room, a world with 4 walls and a heater. Could buy a hot meal, maybe 2, the kind that steamed and filled your lungs with the scent of life. It was survival lying there in the snow. The temptation was a physical force, a weight pressing down on him, whispering of warmth and fullness. He could just take it. Who would know? Who would even care about a ghost in a doorway? His mother's face swam in his memory, her eyes warm, her voice a soft hum. "Integrity, Leo," she used to say, her worn hands cupping his own. "It's the one thing no one can ever take from you. It's what you are when no one is watching." The memory was a flickering candle against the howling gale of his desperation. But it was enough. With a groan, his frozen joints protesting, Leo pushed himself to his feet. He shuffled across the street, his broken sneakers sinking into the slush, and bent down. His fingers, numb and stiff, fumbled with the wallet. It was thick, heavy with possibility. He didn't open it. He didn't dare. To see the money would be to give the temptation a face, a voice. He simply clutched it in his hand, a small, cold weight of another man's life, and retreated to the shadows of his doorway to wait. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Each gust of wind was a new torment, each snowflake a tiny needle against his exposed skin. He began to shiver violently, his teeth chattering a frantic rhythm against the silence. Finally, the pharmacy doors slid open again. The large man stormed out, his face a mask of raw panic. He slapped his pockets, his gaze darting around the street like a cornered animal. His eyes were wild with a fear that seemed too large for a simple lost wallet. Leo saw it then, the raw terror beneath the man's intimidating exterior. This was more than just money. Taking a deep, unsteady breath, Leo stepped out from the shadows. "Sir?" The man's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes, narrowed and suspicious, fell upon the thin, shivering boy. He was immense, a mountain of muscle and leather, with a thick beard and a gaze that could chip stone. His initial expression was one of annoyance, of a man who had no time for whatever this street kid was selling. I think you dropped this," Leo stammered, holding out the wallet in a trembling hand. The man's harsh expression dissolved. It melted away, replaced by a wave of disbelief so profound it seemed to steal the air from his lungs. He stared from Leo's face to the wallet and back again, his mouth slightly agape. He took the wallet, his large, calloused fingers brushing against Leo's frozen ones. He didn't check the contents. He just looked at Leo, his gaze searching, intense. "You waited?" the man said. His voice a low rumble, rough like gravel but laced with a strange, new softness. "In this, you waited." Leo just nodded, unable to speak past the chattering of his teeth. The man reached into his coat. "Kid, you have no idea. Here, let me give you something." He started to pull out a bill. But Leo saw the white paper bag from the pharmacy clutched in the man's other hand, the name of a children's hospital printed on the side. He saw the urgency that hadn't left the man's eyes, the desperate need to be somewhere else. The money, the wallet, it was all tied to that bag, to that hospital. Suddenly, his own suffering felt small. "No, sir," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. "You look like you're in a hurry. Just get where you're going." The man froze, his hand hovering over the cash. He looked from the wallet to the pharmacy bag, and then truly looked at Leo for the first time. He saw the worn-out coat, the chapped lips, the profound, soul-deep exhaustion in the boy's dark eyes. And in them, he saw an honor he hadn't encountered in a long, long time. He put the money away and placed a hand that felt as heavy as stone on Leo's shoulder. The warmth of it seeped through the thin coat, a small anchor in the storm. "You're a good kid," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "A damn good kid. The pack won't forget this." He gave Leo's shoulder a firm squeeze and then turned, moving with renewed purpose down the street, disappearing into the swirling snow. The brief warmth from the man's hand faded almost instantly, leaving Leo colder than before. The adrenaline of the encounter drained away, and the hunger and the biting wind returned with a vengeance. He had done the right thing, his mother's voice a proud whisper in his mind, but integrity couldn't fill his stomach, couldn't shield him from the ice that was forming on his eyelashes. He slumped back into his doorway, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. The snow was falling harder now, the world turning into a white blur. As if to mock his small act of virtue, the side door of the diner next to the bookstore burst open. Mr. Gable, the owner, a man with a perpetually sour face and a shriveled heart, stood there, a bucket of dirty water in his hand. He saw Leo huddled in the doorway. "What did I tell you about loitering here?" Gable snarled, his voice cutting through the wind. "You're scaring off customers. We don't want your kind around here, making the place look bad." "I'm not doing anything," Leo mumbled, trying to make himself smaller. "You're breathing, aren't you?" "That's enough." Gable took a step forward, his eyes filled with a petty, cruel satisfaction. "Get out of here before I call the cops. I mean it this time. Go on, get." He made a shooing motion as if Leo were a stray dog, his contempt a palpable thing in the frigid air. The threat hung there, promising a night in a cold cell, a different kind of misery. Defeated, Leo pushed himself up and shuffled away, the warmth of the diner's exhaust vent on his back now a memory of a comfort he wasn't allowed. He was adrift again, a ghost in a storm that was growing angrier by the minute. He found precarious shelter behind the diner's large dumpsters, where the wind was slightly less ferocious. Shivering uncontrollably, he rummaged through the trash, his fingers stiff and clumsy. His prize was a discarded newspaper, not yet soaked through. He flattened it against the wall, hoping to use it as another layer of insulation, when a headline caught his eye. It was from the local section, "Iron Regent's MC Annual Toy Drive a Roaring Success." Below the headline was a picture. A group of burly, bearded men in leather vests stood smiling, surrounded by piles of toys in front of the City Children's Hospital. In the center of the group was a formidable man with silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes, identified as Silas Preacher Thorne, the club's president, and standing right next to him, a protective hand on his shoulder, was the man from the pharmacy. The caption named him Mark Bear Kowalski, Sergeant at Arms. Leo's breath hitched. The pack, the Iron Regents. They were notorious in the city, a club people crossed the street to avoid. They were seen as dangerous, a menace. But here they were, smiling, delivering toys to sick children. He scanned the article, which praised their fundraising efforts for the hospital's oncology ward. The money in the wallet, the pharmacy bag, it wasn't just for one person. It was for them, for the kids. The weight of what he had held in his hand suddenly felt immense. He hadn't just returned a man's money. He had protected a lifeline for children he would never meet. The knowledge was a small, fragile flame flickering to life in the frozen cavern of his chest. But the flame offered no physical warmth. Hours passed. The city lights blurred as the blizzard intensified. Leo's shivering subsided, replaced by a dangerous lethargy. He knew the signs. He was losing. In a final, desperate act, he reached inside his shirt and pulled out the one thing of value he had left in the world. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, hanging from a frayed cord. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of his mother. It was his only tangible connection to love, to a time before the cold. He had to eat. He had to. The pawn shop was a grim, fluorescent-lit box of forgotten dreams. The broker, a man with weary, indifferent eyes, barely glanced at the locket. $15, he said, his voice flat. $15. The price of his last memory. Leo's throat tightened. He was about to nod, to surrender this final piece of himself, when he heard a sob from the other end of the counter. A young woman was pleading with the clerk. "Please, I'm just $12 short. My son's prescription. They won't give it to me without the full amount." The clerk just shook his head. "Sorry, lady. Can't help you." Leo looked at the locket in his hand, his mother's smiling face looking up at him. He looked at the desperate woman, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped in defeat. He saw his own mother in her fear, in her love for her child. The choice was immediate, absolute. It wasn't even a choice. "I'll take it," he said to the broker, his voice hoarse. The broker slid the $15 across the counter. Leo picked up the crumpled bills, walked over to the crying woman, and gently pushed them into her hand. "Here," he whispered, "for your son." She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. I can't." "Please," Leo insisted. "Just get him his medicine." He turned and walked out of the shop before she could protest further, leaving his last connection to his past in her hands. He stepped back out into the blizzard with nothing. The cold no longer felt like an attack. It felt like a homecoming. He had given everything away. There was nothing left to lose. He stumbled back to the alley, his strength finally gone, and collapsed into a drift of snow behind the dumpsters. The world began to fade to a peaceful, numbing white. Just as his eyes began to close, a sound penetrated the thick blanket of the storm. It started as a low, deep vibration in the ground, a tremor in his bones. It grew steadily, a guttural rumble that became a roar, then a thunderous chorus that seemed to shake the very buildings. It was the sound of 100 engines, all speaking with one voice. Through the blinding snow, a single bright headlight cut through the darkness. Then another, and another, until the entire alley was flooded with light. A long, impossible line of motorcycles materialized from the blizzard, their chrome and steel gleaming under the streetlights. They blocked the street from end to end, an army of iron and leather. At the very front of the procession sat 2 bikes. On one was Bear. On the other, the silver-haired man from the newspaper photograph, Preacher. They had come back. Bear was off his bike in an instant, his heavy boots crunching in the snow as he rushed to Leo's side. He knelt, his expression a mixture of relief and horror. "Found him, Preacher. He's here." He gently lifted Leo, who was barely conscious, wrapping him in a thick wool blanket that someone passed forward. "We came back for you, kid." Bear's voice was a warm, rumbling anchor in the dizzying white. "We've been looking for you all day." Preacher wanted to meet the boy with the honest heart. They carried him, half-conscious, not to a hospital, but to the front door of Gable's diner. The diner was empty save for the owner, who was wiping down the counter. When the door opened to admit the shivering boy flanked by two massive bikers, with dozens more visible outside, Gable's face soured. "I told you," he began, his hand reaching for the phone. Preacher stepped forward, his presence filling the small diner. He wasn't loud or aggressive, but he radiated an authority that was absolute. He calmly placed a stack of $100 bills on the counter, the thick bundle making a soft, definitive thud. "My friend here is cold and hungry," Preacher said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. "He'll have your warmest booth and a hot meal, whatever he wants. And while you're at it, we'll be buying out your entire kitchen. Everything. Pack it up. We're delivering it to the Northside shelter. In his name." Mr. Gable stared at the money, then at the sea of leather-clad men outside his window, their faces grim and patient. His bluster evaporated, replaced by a pale, stammering shock. He nodded dumbly, his hands shaking as he scurried toward the kitchen. The bikers filed in, not with menace, but with a quiet purpose. They filled the booths, their collective presence transforming the cheap diner into a sanctuary. One of them, a man with a medical cross stitched on his vest, gently examined Leo, checking for frostbite. Another returned from a nearby store with a new winter coat, thick socks, and sturdy boots. They surrounded him with a wall of warmth and quiet concern, treating him not with pity, but with a deep, abiding respect. As a steaming bowl of stew was placed before him, Leo finally found his voice. How did you find me?" Preacher sat down opposite him, his eyes kind. "We asked around. We described a kid with an old soul's eyes and a coat too thin for the weather, who did the right thing when no one was watching. Took a while, but people talk." He leaned forward slightly. "That wallet, Leo. The money inside was the last of what we'd raised for a little girl's surgery. It was scheduled for this morning. The hospital needed the payment up front. If you hadn't returned it right then, she would have lost her spot. You didn't just save some money, son. You saved a life." The truth of it settled over Leo, an overwhelming, beautiful weight. The news spread through the town with the speed of a winter gale. The story of the homeless boy, the notorious bikers, and the saved child became local legend overnight. People who had once looked through Leo now saw him. Mr. Gable, deeply humbled and ashamed, approached him the next day. He offered a heartfelt apology and a steady job washing dishes, with fair pay and warm meals included. Leo accepted. But the biker's work wasn't finished. Bear, having heard the story of the locket from the tearful woman at the pharmacy, led a contingent to the pawn shop. They didn't just buy back Leo's locket. Preacher laid down enough cash to buy the entire store's inventory of pawned wedding rings, family heirlooms, and tools of forgotten trades. They donated it all to a charity that helped people get back on their feet. Later that evening, Preacher pressed the cool, familiar silver of the locket back into Leo's hand. "Family is important," he said, his voice soft. "It's your anchor, and your family now, son. You're one of us." They offered him more than a job. They offered him a home. A small, clean apartment above their clubhouse garage. A tutor to help him get his GED, a future. They became his pack, his protectors, his found family. 6 months later, the city thawed into a vibrant spring. Leo was no longer the invisible boy in the alley. He was finishing his shift at the diner, his cheeks full, his eyes bright with a future he never thought he'd have. He spent his weekends at the clubhouse, learning to fix engines from Bear, and reading history books recommended by Preacher. He was safe. He was loved. One bright Saturday, he stood beside Bear and Preacher on the gleaming steps of the Children's Hospital, handing out toys for the Regent's spring charity drive. A little girl with a bright pink bow in her newly growing hair ran past, laughing as she chased a ball down the hall. Her mother paused, looked at Leo, and smiled a smile of pure, unadulterated gratitude. It was the girl. Leo watched her run, a healthy, happy child, and felt a profound, cathartic joy that warmed him from the inside out. He looked at the long line of motorcycles gleaming in the sun, their engines a low, comforting rumble. That sound was no longer a threat. It was the sound of loyalty. It was the sound of home. He finally understood that the greatest acts of kindness are not transactions, but seeds. Planted in the harshest winter of despair, they could, against all odds, blossom into the most magnificent, life-altering spring. True wealth was never what a person possessed, but what they were willing to give away, proving that sometimes, a single act of impossible integrity can summon an army of angels, even if they ride on wheels of chrome and steel.